Hi guys, today we're going to take a look at the differences between performing a manual pit stop and performing an assisted pit stop in Assetto Corsa Competizione. We'll look at the time differences, the difficulty, as well as the pros and cons of each method. Let's start with the assisted pit stop first. There are two assists that affect how the pit stops are performed. They are the engine start and the pit limiter assists. Open up your assists options and make sure both assists are set to automatic. After that's done, it's time to go out on track. So you might be thinking, how are we going to measure this? I start the timer the moment the pit limiter engages on the car's dash when crossing the pit-in line, and then I stop the timer when the pit limiter disengages when exiting the pit lane. In these examples that I'm about to show you, I bring the car to an abrupt stop and I get the car to go straight up so I can get the quickest time possible. In a race scenario, I would generally ease into the pit box area and not be so aggressive with the brakes, as it would be very easy to overshoot or fall short of the ideal stopping point. So let's take a look at the assisted pit stop strategy. There are two things that I'm focusing on now. The first is to get the car slowed down enough below the speed limit before I cross the pit-in line. And then the second thing is to make sure that I stop the car in the ideal position so that it goes straight up on its jacks. Once the car is lifted, my foot goes back on the accelerator and I wait for the automatic engine start to kick in so that I can continue out of the pits. And here we can see that we came up with about 30.16 seconds time from when we entered the pits to when we left the pits. For the next test, we're going to go back into the assist settings and we're going to change the engine start from automatic to manual. And then we're going to see what effect that has on our pit stop time. In the second test, I'm doing the same as I did before. I'm ensuring that the car is slowed down below the speed limit before I cross the pit-in line. I'll go into detail shortly on how I do the manual pit stop, but for now let's just see me perform it and then see if we are actually gaining time or losing time.
Let's go, go, go.
As we cross the pit exit line, we can see that the pit stop took us 27.01 seconds. Let's compare both methods and try and see the critical moments during the pit stop process where time is gained. As both cars come to a stop, the manual car on the bottom right lifts up onto its jacks a lot sooner than the other car, and also accelerates out of the pit box as soon as the car drops down.
Let's go, 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 go. Come on, go, go, go.
Here we can see that by manually shutting down and starting the engine during a pit stop, we can save 3 seconds. There are a few things we need to do before we can actually perform the manual pit stop. Firstly, let's make sure that we have the engine start assist set to manual. Once that's been confirmed, go to your controller settings and map a button on your wheel or controller to ignition and map another button to starter. You may want to map the ignition button somewhere where you cannot accidentally hit it, or you could cut your engine out mid-race. If this is your first time using the manual engine start, remember you will always need to switch the ignition on and then press the starter for 1 second to start your car. This applies to whether you are in the pits or when you are out on track about to start a race. The ignition indicator gives us additional information. Grey means that the ignition is off. Green, we know that the ignition is then on. And finally, when it is white, it means that both the ignition is on and the engine is running. So let me show you how to manually switch off and start the engine, and I'll break it down in steps when we get to the pit box. Just like in the previous test, we need to brake and gear down to first gear. We have to get the car under the pit lane speed limit before we cross the pit in line, and once we've crossed it, we can get back on the accelerator again. During this time, if you want, you can change your view to the bonnet cam view, and this helps you with lining up the car as you enter the pit box. The key here is to switch off the engine while we are braking. Just hold down the starter button while you brake. You will know when the engine is off, as the ignition indicator will change from white to green. Once the car is up on its jacks, you will get a countdown timer displaying how long your pit stop will be. When the timer reaches 1 second, you want to hold down the starter button. If done correctly, your car will already be starting while it drops down off the jacks, and you will be able to drive away immediately. Starting the car before the countdown timer reaches 1 second can result in the car stalling before it hits the ground. It takes a second to start the car, so wait until the countdown timer reaches 1 second before holding down the starter button. You will know you've done this correctly because the ignition button on the HUD will change from green to white. Let's look at the pros and cons of both methods, and then I'll weigh in with my personal opinion. Performing pit stops with the automatic engine start assist enabled is definitely the safest method. However, it's considerably slower than the manual method. It also doesn't require any specific button mapping, so that allows you to map extra functions instead. Performing pit stops with manual engine start is clearly the fastest method. However, it does mean that you need to assign the ignition and start function to your button mapping on your wheel or controller. It does have its risks, as you can get it wrong. That is why if you decide to use the manual method, practice it offline before you decide to use it in an online race. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and feel free to leave a comment or suggestion, and look forward to chatting to you another time. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.